This day was unbelievably different. Jax didn't know what was coming, but he was about to be shell-shocked. Stars shimmered like scattered diamonds in the sky out of his ship window. But for Jax, they were just reminders of how far he was from anything or anyone that mattered. He called his ship the Wanderer, and it suited him. He had spent years drifting from one corner of the galaxy to another, taking odd jobs, running from his past and avoiding any attachments that might slow him down. He was in the middle of plotting his next jump when the light appeared. At first he thought it was a sensor glitch. The glow was faint, but growing steadily brighter out of place in this quiet sector of space. Jax frowned and adjusted the scanners, but they showed nothing. No ships, no anomalies, just empty void. Yet the light persisted, moving closer with an unsettling grace. Before he could react, the source of the light materialized, a sleek silver ship. Its surface rippling like liquid metal. Jax's jaw tightened. The ship didn't broadcast a call sign or identification code. It simply hovered there, silent and otherworldly, as if it were waiting. Then came the voice. "Hello, Wanderer. Are you always this unfriendly, or is today special?" The voice was warm, smooth, and laced with a playful confidence that immediately put Jax on edge. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the controls to activate his shields. But before he could, the voice came again. "Relax, Jax. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have said hello first." That stopped him cold. How did she know his name? Jax's fingers hovered over the console, his mind racing through every possibility. Had someone hired her to track him down? Was she a bounty hunter? A con artist? Or something worse? "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice low and guarded. The silver ship glided closer, and for the first time, Jax noticed a faint hum emanating from it, a sound that resonated in his chest like the vibration of a plucked string. "I'm Lyra," the voice said, "and I need a favor." The request hung in the air, daring him to refuse. Jax considered ignoring her, cutting the comms, and jumping to hyperspace. But something about her voice stopped him. There was an energy to it, a pull he couldn't explain. Against his better judgment, he activated the docking sequence. The airlock hissed open, and she stepped inside. Lyra was unlike anyone Jax had ever seen. Her hair shimmered with an iridescent glow, cascading over her shoulders like strands of spun starlight. Her eyes, glowing faintly, locked onto his with a confidence that made him feel exposed. She wore a sleek jumpsuit that hugged her figure, but it wasn't her appearance that struck him most. It was her presence, a magnetic energy that seemed to fill the room. "You're even grumpier in person," she said, her lips curving into a sly smile. "But I like a challenge." Jax crossed his arms, forcing himself to look unimpressed. "What do you want?" Lyra stepped closer, her gaze never wavering. "An adventure, and you're going to give it to me." Jax paced the cockpit, his mind racing as Lyra explained her situation. She wasn't just some lost traveler. She was carrying something, a piece of alien tech she called the Pulse. "It's not just a device," she said, leaning against the console. "It's alive. It has its own will." Jax stopped pacing and gave her a skeptical look. "Alive? What does that even mean?" Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, Jax thought he saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. She held out her hand, and a faint glow appeared between her fingers. The pulse materialized, a small orb of shifting light and energy. It pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. "It chose me," Lyra said quietly, "and now Novacor wants it. They'll do anything to get it back." Jax frowned. He had heard of Novacor, a massive corporation with a reputation for ruthless tactics. If they were after Lyra, it meant she was in serious trouble. The smart thing to do would be to send her on her way. Let her deal with her own problems. But as he stared at the pulse, he felt an inexplicable pull toward it, and toward her. "Why me?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Why bring this to me?" Lyra smiled, a teasing glint in her glowing eyes. "Because you're the best pilot in the quadrant, and because you don't scare easy." Jax wanted to argue, wanted to tell her to find someone else, but deep down, he knew he wouldn't. There was something about her, something he couldn't walk away from. Their first challenge came sooner than expected. Novacor's ships appeared on the radar, sleek and predatory. Jax cursed under his breath as the Wanderer's alarms blared. Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she slid into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers flying across the controls. "Don't just stand there," she said with a grin. "Show me what you've got." Jax's lips twitched into a reluctant smirk. He didn't trust her, but he couldn't deny she was impressive. Together, they plotted an escape, dodging plasma fire and outmaneuvering the enemy ships. When they finally jumped to hyperspace, Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Lyra turned to him, her eyes sparkling. "Not bad. Wanderer." "Not bad at all." The Wanderer emerged from hyperspace into a desolate sector of the galaxy. Stars here were dim, their light barely piercing the surrounding darkness. Jax's scanners detected nothing but cold void. It was the kind of place most pilots avoided, silent, forgotten, and uncharted. Lyra, however, seemed unbothered. "This is it," she said, her voice calm. "The station should be nearby." Jax glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "You're sure about this? Looks like a good place to die alone." Lyra smirked, her glowing eyes reflecting the faint light from the console. "Trust me, Jax. You'll thank me later." Jax muttered something under his breath but adjusted the Wanderer's trajectory as Lyra directed. A few moments later, the station came into view, its massive structure drifting lifelessly against the backdrop of stars. It was ancient, its surface covered in alien carvings that shimmered faintly. The sight sent a shiver down Jax's spine. "This place doesn't feel right," he said, his voice low. "It's too still." Lyra ignored his comment and started prepping the docking sequence. Jax watched her, torn between annoyance and admiration. She was fearless, or at least very good at pretending to be. The station's docking bay was massive, its interior dimly lit by glowing panels that pulsed with an unsteady rhythm. As the Wanderer settled into place, Jax felt the same strange vibration he had noticed earlier with Lyra's ship. It was subtle, almost like the station itself was alive. They stepped onto the platform, their boots echoing in the vast, empty space. Lyra led the way, her movements confident and purposeful. Jax followed, his hand resting on the blaster at his hip. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. "You've been here before?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once," Lyra replied without looking back. "But not this deep. The pulse guided me here before. It's guiding me again now." Jax frowned but didn't press further. He didn't like the way she talked about the pulse, as if it had a mind of its own. But he couldn't deny there was something unusual about it. The deeper they ventured into the station, the stronger the vibrations became, resonating in his chest like the low hum of a starship engine. They reached a massive chamber at the heart of the station. Crystals jutted out from the walls and floor, glowing faintly. The light they emitted seemed to pulse in time with Lyra's steps. She approached one of the larger crystals and placed her hand on its surface. The glow intensified, bathing her in a soft, ethereal light. Jax took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to leave. "What the hell are you doing?" Lyra didn't respond immediately. Her eyes closed, and a serene expression crossed her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost reverent. "The pulse is connecting to the station. It's recharging." "Recharging for what?" Jax demanded. Before she could answer, the station trembled. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by a series of sharp, mechanical sounds. Jax's hand went to his blaster as the vibrations grew stronger. Lyra stepped away from the crystal, her expression calm but focused. "They know we're here," she said. "Who?" Jax asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lyra turned to him, her eyes glowing brighter than before. "Novacor." The station's silence was shattered by the sound of approaching ships. Novacor had found them, their sleek vessels circling the station like predators closing in on wounded prey. Jax and Lyra ran through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. "Do you have a plan?" Jax asked, his voice tense. Lyra glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Trust me," Jax groaned. "You keep saying that, but it's not helping my nerves." They reached the station's control room, a large circular chamber filled with alien consoles and holographic displays. Lyra moved to the central console, her hands flying over the controls. The screens lit up, displaying a series of glyphs Jax couldn't understand. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Activating the defenses," Lyra replied. "This station was designed to protect the pulse. We just need to buy enough time for it to fully charge." As she worked, the vibrations in the station grew stronger, pulsing in time with the glow of the crystals. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that the station was alive, reacting to Lyra's presence. "Why does it feel like this place is waking up?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Because it is. The pulse isn't just connected to me, it's connected to this station. To everything." Jax stared at her, a mixture of awe and unease in his expression. He opened his mouth to respond, but a loud explosion shook the station. The Nova Corps ships had breached the outer defenses. Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but determined. "We need to hold them off." Jax nodded, his blaster already in hand. They moved through the station together, working in unison to fend off the Nova Corps troops that had boarded. Jax couldn't help but admire the way Lyra moved, confident, precise, and utterly fearless. She was like a force of nature, and he found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. Between firefights, they found brief moments of calm. In one such moment, Lyra turned to Jax, her gaze softening. "Thank you for not abandoning me." Jax shrugged, trying to play it cool. "I'm just in it for the adventure." Lyra smiled, but there was something deeper in her eyes, something vulnerable. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're a terrible liar." "Jax." Before he could respond, another explosion rocked the station. Their moment was over, but the memory of it lingered, burning bright in Jax's mind. The station's heart pulsed like a living thing. Each wave of energy reverberated through the walls, the floor, and the air itself. The crystals that lined the chamber glowed brighter and brighter, their light spilling across Jax and Lyra as they stood side by side. Jax's grip tightened on his blaster. His jaw set. Nova Corps' ships were circling the station like sharks scenting blood, and the station's defenses wouldn't hold much longer. Lyra's gaze was steady, her face illuminated by the flickering glow of the station's core. "The pulse is almost ready," she said softly, "but it needs a little more time." Jax turned his head to look at her. "And how exactly are we supposed to give it that?" "Nova Corps isn't exactly waiting for an invitation to storm in here." Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer to the core, her movements calm and deliberate. She placed her hand against one of the glowing crystals. Her fingers splayed across its surface. The light intensified, wrapping around her in tendrils that seemed almost alive. When she turned back to Jax, her expression was uncharacteristically serious. "This station was built to protect the pulse," she said, "but it wasn't built for two people to defend it. You need to go." "Jax." Jax's eyes narrowed. "Not a chance. I'm not leaving you here. You have to," Lyra insisted. Her voice was firm, but there was an edge of something else there. Fear, or maybe desperation. "The pulse chose me. If Nova Corps takes it, I'll be the only one who can stop them from using it. But if they get you too, everything we've done will mean nothing." Jax shook his head, his mind racing. "No. If you're staying, I'm staying. End of discussion." The sound of an explosion interrupted their argument. The station shuddered violently, the lights flickering as Nova Corps' ships began their final assault. Jax steadied himself against the wall, his blaster at the ready. Lyra's eyes met his, glowing brighter than ever. "If we're doing this together," she said, "we need a plan." The first wave of Nova Corps troops breached the outer defenses, their sleek armor gleaming in the dim light of the station's corridors. Jax and Lyra moved quickly, using the narrow passageways to their advantage. Jax's aim was precise, each shot finding its mark. Lyra, meanwhile, moved with a grace that was almost otherworldly. She carried no weapon, but the pulse itself seemed to respond to her presence, sending out bursts of energy that disoriented their enemies. "You know," Jax said between shots, "you could have mentioned you could do that sooner." Lyra smirked, her eyes never leaving the advancing troops. "Where's the fun in that?" They pushed forward, driving Nova Corps' forces back toward the docking bay, but the victory was short-lived. A second wave of troops poured in, their numbers overwhelming. Jax cursed under his breath as he ducked behind a fallen piece of debris. "This isn't sustainable," he said, his voice tight. "We're running out of space and options." Lyra didn't respond immediately. She was focused on the pulse, her hand hovering over the small orb of light and energy that floated beside her. It pulsed faintly, as if alive, and Jax realized with a start that it was syncing with her movements, almost like it was an extension of her body. "I can buy us more time," Lyra said finally. "But it's going to take everything the station has left." "What does that mean?" Jax asked, already dreading the answer. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "It means the station won't survive. And maybe I won't either." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Lyra led Jax back to the central chamber, the pulse glowing brighter with each step. The station trembled around them, the vibrations growing stronger as its energy reserves were pushed to their limits. By the time they reached the core, the crystals were blazing with light, their intensity almost blinding. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the station. "Once I activate the final surge, the pulse will be fully charged. It'll release an energy wave strong enough to disable every Nova Corps ship in the area." "And what happens to you?" Jax demanded. Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. "I don't know," she admitted. "But it doesn't matter. This is bigger than me. Bigger than us." Jax stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Don't give me that self-sacrificing hero speech. You're not doing this alone." Lyra smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "You're a good man, Jax, better than you think you are. But this is my fight." Before Jax could respond, Lyra placed her hands on the core. The light intensified, flooding the chamber with energy. The pulse began to spin, its glow growing brighter and brighter until it was almost unbearable. Jax shielded his eyes, his instincts screaming at him to pull her away, to stop her, to do something, but he couldn't move. The energy wave erupted from the core, spreading outward in a blinding flash of light. The station shook violently, and for a moment, Jax thought it would tear itself apart. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. When Jax opened his eyes, the chamber was dark. The crystals had gone dim, their light extinguished. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the Wanderer's systems in the distance. Jax's heart sank as he looked around the chamber, his gaze landing on the spot where Lyra had stood. She was gone. Jax fell to his knees, his chest tight. He didn't know how long he sat there, staring at the lifeless core, before a faint glow caught his attention. It was the pulse, floating where Lyra had been. Slowly, it drifted toward him, its light soft and warm. Jax reached out, his hand trembling, and the pulse settled into his palm. The energy it radiated was familiar, comforting. Jax closed his eyes, and for a moment, he thought he heard Lyra's voice, a whisper in the back of his mind. "Keep going, Wanderer. There's more to do." Jax stood, his grip tightening around the pulse. He didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing for certain. Lyra wasn't gone. Not completely, and as long as he carried the pulse, he wouldn't stop fighting. The stars outside the station were brighter now, their light spilling into the chamber as if beckoning him forward. Jax took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He had a new purpose now, a new mission. And he wasn't wandering alone anymore. The Wanderer drifted silently through the void, the vastness of space stretching endlessly in every direction. Jax sat in the cockpit, the pulse resting in his palm, its soft glow illuminating the darkened control panels. It had been weeks since the battle at the station, weeks since he had watched Lyra disappear into the light. The memory still haunted him, but the ache of her absence was no longer as sharp. Instead, it was a quiet presence, a reminder of everything she had given him. He had thought about returning to his old life, smuggling, running, surviving. But the pulse had other ideas. It guided him now, its faint pulses tugging at his instincts, drawing him toward uncharted space. Jax didn't understand it, but he trusted it. And in a way, he trusted her. He liked to think she was still with him, her energy intertwined with the pulse. The comms panel crackled to life, breaking the silence. A distress signal, faint, but clear. Jax's fingers hovered over the controls, his mind racing. He had spent years avoiding situations like this, refusing to get involved in other people's problems. But things were different now. He activated the comms and spoke into the mic. His voice steady. "This is the Wanderer. I'm on my way." As the ship turned toward the signal, Jax glanced at the pulse one last time. Its glow brightened, as if in approval. A small smile tugged at his lips, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The Wanderer's engines roared to life, and the ship disappeared into the stars, chasing a new purpose and a new adventure.